In all of public speaking, persuasive speaking is probably the most difficult thing that you'll need to do. Heck, even outside persuasive speaking, persuading somebody to do something can be difficult, if not problematic. So when you're trying to prepare for a persuasive speaking event, whether it's a speech or whatever, it's important to have a good understanding of the psychology of persuasion, how it works, and what the barriers are that you face when you're trying to persuade an individual or group or whatever. And how persuasion works, the psychology behind it, and again, how that should guide you in forming your persuasive message is the subject of today's video. So as I said, persuasive speaking, by far, one of the most difficult and challenging types of speech giving there is. And part of the reason is pretty simple. Now, I'm simplifying it radically here, but I hope you'll get the point. And it's simply this. If you believe A, and I'm going to try to convince you to change your mind and then start believing B, persuade you to change from A to B. Now think about this. What has to happen at some point in order for me to be successful at changing your mind from A to B? Well, if you might have thought of a few things and maybe you got it right, but at a basic level, very basic, what has to happen is you have to admit that on some level, you're wrong. Because after all, if you're not wrong on some level, why should you change your mind or change your opinion? So ultimately, part of persuading people is trying to convince them that their current view is wrong in some way. And here's the thing. Do we like admitting we're wrong? No, never. I mean, how many of you all have ever gotten in an argument with somebody about anything, only to figure out about 20, 30 seconds into the said argument that you really are wrong? And at that point, did you go, wait, stop, you're right, I'm wrong? Did you do that? Or did you keep arguing anyway, even though you knew you were wrong? Because at that point, it was more important to win than it was to be right. We can probably all think of a case where we knew we were wrong, but still argued anyway because we didn't want to admit it. Okay, so trying to convince somebody to change their mind is problematic because at a fundamental level, you have to get them to admit they're wrong. And this plays a lot into the psychology of persuasion and what all's involved in it. Now, what exactly is persuasion? Well, persuasion is the act of creating, reinforcing, or changing a person's belief or actions. Now, let's talk about this. Now, changing a person's belief, going from A to B, we can all see how that would be persuasion. But the key thing that makes a persuasive message persuasive is that you are making an argument within that speech. Something is good, bad, right, wrong, we should do A instead of B, whatever. And that's where creating and reinforcing can come in. You can give a persuasive speech to an audience that already agrees with you. An example would be during presidential election years. You might remember seeing presidential conventions where a party gets together for their nominee, and that nominee eventually gives a speech to those convention goers at the end of the week. Chances are those convention goers already know they're going to vote for that person. They already know that's going to happen. Okay, but what they're trying to do there is reinforce, yes, you made the right choice. I'm the right candidate. I can do this. Okay, so you can give a speech to a group that agrees with you. That's just the reinforcement aspect of persuasive speaking. Remember, the key thing is you're making some type of argument. You can also give a persuasive speech to a group that has no idea what you're initially talking about. Okay, you are literally creating their opinion from scratch. Remember, the key thing is you're making an argument. You might need to educate them a little bit in that speech, but the point is you're still making an argument and you are creating their belief from scratch. But most commonly we think of the changing, and that's where you got to convince people they're wrong, as I said before. So understanding that's what persuasion is, let's take a look at the basics of persuasion. Now, I have been teaching this class long enough to know that some of you, if not a majority of you, when you pass this class, will do a brain dump on some of what you learned because you're like, I'm never going to have to use that again. Do not brain dump this. This will be important to you no matter what you wind up doing in life, okay? Because persuading people is something you're going to have to do no matter what you do, no matter what your job is going to come into it. So understanding how persuasion works and the barriers and the limitations persuasion theory makes for you is important in crafting a good persuasive speech, okay? So let's look at this chart. Now use this chart to explain the basics of persuasion. Okay, now what this chart basically says is that on any issue that you can think of, I don't care what the issue is, every human being in the planet will fall into one of these 7 categories. And as you can see, they go from, strongly in favor, strongly opposed, to the other side, strongly in favor, strongly opposed, right? Everybody's going to fall into one of those. And you might say, well, what if they have no idea what I'm talking about? Okay, well, then you're in neutral, right? Now, one thing I do want to say real quick is I don't want you to get confused and think that everybody, for example, in the slightly in favor category has the same uniform opinion. That's not true, okay? There are degrees in each of these various categories. We just don't put them on the chart because it would make the chart look really messy, and that goes against a lot of what we teach. So for the purpose of just explaining this, imagine that in each one of these categories, there's like a level 1 to 10. So there's like a level 1 slightly in favor up to a level 10 slightly in favor, okay? And a level 11 slightly in favor, it would be a level 1 moderate, okay? So you understand how that works? So again, everybody on any issue, I don't care what the issue is, everybody on the planet will fall into one of these 7 categories. Now, about 85% of people, roughly, fall somewhere within that green box. Now that's roughly, ballpark at a level 3-ish, strongly opposed, all the way to a level 3-ish, strongly in favor on the other side. It's 85% of people. So the vast majority of people on the issue will fall within that green box. But what about those outside? Well, way on the ends, on the fringes, you have the extreme points of view. These are like your levels 8, 9, and 10, if you will, on both strongly in favor and strongly opposed. Now, what persuasion theory also tells us is when you get out to these extremes, these opinions tend to be so extreme, they turn on their own principles, okay? What we also might say is they cannibalize their own ideas or values. So let's take an issue that illustrates this pretty well. A little controversial, but I think you'll understand. Let's take the issue of abortion. Okay, I know, controversial issue. Not saying it's right or wrong. We're just using it as an example here. So the group that we say is opposed to abortion, is against abortion, the label we often give to that group is pro-life. Okay. But when you get into the pro-life position and you get way out to those extremes, that's levels 8, 9, and 10, you get people who are so against abortion, so pro-life, if you will, that they kill people. Example would be the anti-abortion activist who several years ago killed an abortion doctor in Wichita, Kansas. He was so for saving people's lives, he killed somebody. I think we can agree that doesn't tend to make sense. Life is sacred, so I'm going to kill people. That doesn't jive. And the same is true on the other side. Okay, in general, the group of people that are in favor of abortion, the label we tend to give them is pro-choice. All right, but here again, you get out to that extreme, those levels 8, 9, and 10, and that pro-choice point of view, you tend to start seeing people that are so pro-choice, they want abortion mandatory for population control. They would like the whole world to adopt a 1 or 2 only child policy like they had in China for years, because they think the earth is overpopulated and we need to start having forced abortions to get the population down. They're so pro-choice, they want to get rid of the choice part. Again, you see how that doesn't jive. But again, that's not most people. Okay, remember, 85% are between that like level 2 or 3 strongly on one side to 2 or 3 strongly on the other. That's the vast majority of people. Now, what's important to note here is when you are trying to persuade people, you need to think about your target audience. This is one of those cases where the audience is king. It guides everything you do. And I might have said this in a previous video, but I will reiterate it here. One of the worst mistakes you can make when trying to come up with a persuasive speech or a persuasive message in general is to write a speech, for example, that your end result is to go, yeah, that would persuade me. Don't do that. Well, Mr. DeBerry, why not? Because you're not the one that needs to be persuaded. That audience is. And what might be very persuasive to you might be totally nonsense to the audience, might not even persuade them at all, or might even make them mad and they'll quit listening to you. Okay? So you want to think about that target audience and what arguments are they going to be willing to listen to? What arguments could move them? Now, it's important to note that's not the entire audience, okay? Specifically, the target audience is the portion of the audience that you're trying to persuade, okay? It's the audience you're actually trying to move, that the portion of them. It's not everybody that will hear your message, okay? It's the portion you're trying to move. You know, for example, my wife and I recently needed to get a new car, and we saw ads on TV for things like Lexus, but we didn't pay much attention to them because that's out of our price range. We still saw those messages, but they're not targeted towards us, okay? So you want to think about what that target audience is and what they would be willing to listen to. And that might be, if you were going to rank, for example, your personal reasons why you believe what you believe, maybe what's most important to them might be 5 or 6 on your list. But to them, it's number one. An example I might have used earlier is, let's say you were giving a speech on why you should be pro-life. And the number one reason why you were pro-life is for some religious reason. Understandable. Millions of people around the world feel the same way for the same reason. But you're going to be giving that speech about why you should be pro-life to an audience, and the only thing you know about this audience is they're all card-carrying members of the American Atheist Association. Should you even bring up religion? No. It's going to be a non-starter. It's not going to persuade them, and it's going to make them more hostile to you. You probably need to look at one of the other reasons down on your reasons why you're pro-life, okay? So you need to figure out what that target audience is. Now, so again, if this is the whole audience out there, and you're trying to move an audience, maybe that is just the target audience you're trying to reach, okay? That one group. Now, here's the thing. This is where your target audience is. Now, you are trying to get them to move more towards the favorable side, okay? You're trying to move them towards the favorable position, whatever that is. Let's use our abortion example. This is a group that's in that pro-life group, and you're trying to move them more towards the pro-choice point of view. So here's my question. What position should you advocate to try to get them to move? Should you try to get them to move to be neutral, or strongly in favor, slightly in favor, moderately in favor, slightly opposed? What do you think? Well, the answer is the most you want to try to do is move them there. What persuasion theory tells us is that when you are trying to change people's minds, the most you can really hope to accomplish is to move them one block to either the left or the right. That's it. Can people have radical change bigger than that? Absolutely. But it's usually because of some type of event, not because of a speech you gave. Great example. If you were to do a poll of U.S. citizens in 1941 at the end of November, so November 30th, 1941, and ask them, should the U.S. get militarily involved in World War II? I'm not sure the exact numbers. You could check me in history, but I believe like 70 to 80% were like, no, we should not get involved in World War II militarily. Maybe send some aid, but that's it. We're not sending our boys in uniform to go die in another European war. But if you were to ask that question 1 week later, you'd see the exact opposite. Over 90% in favor of getting us involved militarily in World War II. Now, is that because FDR gave some kind of great speech? No, it's because Pearl Harbor happened. So those type of massive quick changes can occur, but it's usually not going to be because of a speech. It's because of something that people experience, all right? So it doesn't matter. Even if you personally, your viewpoint is in the moderately favor block, you are making arguments just to move them from moderately opposed to slightly opposed, just trying to trim their opinion down a bit. And that's what you want to try to do. Because again, you want them to try to listen. You're trying to create movement. And you don't even want to try to do more than that. Here's why. All right. So there's something called the boomerang effect. Here's what the boomerang effect says. If your target audience is here and you give a speech trying to change their opinion to move to here, the most likely result is by the time you're done, the audience's viewpoint that you're trying to reach, that target audience's view, will actually have changed to there. Well, that's not what you were trying to do, was it? Your message was so outside of their comfort zone, so outside of what they think is normal or rational, it actually caused them to go further the other way. It further entrenches them into their own point of view. All right? Now you might be thinking, but I'm just trying to go slightly in favor. Right. One block left to right. How are you going to make that switch? You're going to come across to them as crazy and nuts, and they're going to probably think something like, wow, this is what they believe. I really need to take this more seriously. And they'll just become further entrenched in their own position. Okay? And you see a lot of people make this mistake. I see it all the time. People try to push too hard, too fast. This is why things like social change take so long. Because if you come right out the gate trying to change people's minds to do a 180, boomerang effect, what's going to happen? It's going to cause them to get further entrenched in their point of view. A more simplistic example you can relate to is, think about maybe back when you were kids, how many of you were trying to, you asked your parents if you could do something and they said no. And so then you started explaining your point of view, maybe offering some more information, and you eventually got them from a no to a position of, I don't know, let me just think about it for a bit because I'm really not comfortable with this. And what you should have done then was say, okay, let's talk again in a few days after you have time to think about it. But is that what you did? Probably not. What you did is what most people did. You saw a little bit of hope, and so what'd you do? You kept pushing. And eventually that parent went from let me think about it to, you know what? No, forget it. Not a chance in hell. Don't even ask about it again. Sound familiar? Boomerang effect. And you can see through whether it's individuals running for office or social movements or anything, if they push too hard, too fast, they wind up failing. And it's because of this boomerang effect. Remember, you need to think about what that audience is and what they're willing to listen to and what you could honestly hope to accomplish. And admittedly, sometimes the most you can hope to accomplish is to have one person come up to you afterwards and say, don't agree with you, but I can at least see where you're coming from. I don't think you're crazy, but I don't agree with you. That could be a huge win, depending on the area. And the other thing you want to always keep in mind with this is that persuasion is a mental dialogue with the audience. Even if nobody actually says anything, an audience that you are trying to persuade is debating you in their head as they are listening to you. And so what does that mean? You want to think about arguments they are more than likely going to have against your point of view and pre-plan responses to them. Okay? For example, let's say I was giving a speech in favor of marijuana legalization. Hot button issue comes up a lot now. Now, if you're going to give a speech about marijuana legalization, what should you just know are going to be some of the reasons why people are not going to be in favor of that? What they're going to think about gateway drug, what about kids, all these other things. So understand that. In your introduction, say, now I know some people might not agree with me. You maybe have concerns about it being gateway drug. You may have concerns about children. And I understand. I understand your concerns, and I promise you I will address them over the course of my speech. What have I just done? I've one, established common ground with the audience in that I've acknowledged that their point of view is valid, even if I disagree with it. I understand. I haven't said you're stupid, you're an idiot, you're a moron, or called you, racist, sexist, or whatever for having that point of view. I understand. And I promised I would address it. Now, what that does is it puts the audience in a position where minimally they'll listen because you have acknowledged the difference. You haven't degraded them. You haven't, said you're a horrible person. But that also becomes incumbent upon you that you also darn well better bring it up. You don't say you're going to bring it up and then not address it because then they're going to think you lied to them. All right. So all this is important parts of understanding the psychological process that goes into persuasion. It's not just about making arguments. It's about making the right arguments that are trying to reach your right target audience that will move them in a way that is effective. Okay. And you might be thinking, but I want to get them over to moderately in my side. And they're still moderate. You only move them to slightly against. I want to get them to moderate. Yes. But once you move them from moderate to slightly, then you can come back later and try to move them from slightly to neutral. Remember, one block, left, right. And then once you get them to neutral, then you can mark for slightly in favor. That's why this takes time. So big takeaways. Understand there's a psychological process here and don't overplay your hand. Keep it in mind and make sure your messages in persuasive speaking are tailored to what can actually be effective. So I hope you now have a better understanding of the psychology that goes into persuasion. Like I said, it's not just about making any old argument. It's about thinking about the audience that you're giving the speech to and what arguments they are willing to listen to. And focusing on those and not making the arguments that you just know from the start are going to be non-starters or even make them more hostile to you. And if you begin your persuasive speaking preparation keeping those things in mind, the boomerang effect and that model and how it works, I guarantee you it'll make you a much more effective persuasive speaker.